We finished the book of Exodus last time, the book of Exodus, and then jumped up to the New Testament and saw some of the New Testament relevance of what we heard there in Exodus chapter 40 with the glory cloud and that special verb episkiadzin that Luke chooses. And so then after Exodus, you come to the book of Leviticus. The book of Leviticus is a very important book, but not important for what we're doing right now. So we're going to jump over the book of Leviticus. It's basically the sacramentary of the Levitical priesthood. So it's the book that has all the special prayers and rites and orders of things for the Levitical priests from Mount Sinai forward. And that's very interesting information, and there's a lot of interesting quotes from it later on in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. So it's not that the book is unimportant, but for what we're doing right now, just kind of trying to get a general picture overview of salvation history in the Old Testament, we're going to jump over the book of Leviticus and come to the book of Numbers, where we have a narrative continuing. The book of Numbers is called the book of Numbers in most Bibles because of the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament. It's originally called the wilderness, Midvar, the wilderness, because of the first line, the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness, the Midvar, the wilderness. So that's how it's called in the Hebrew numbering system or naming system. It's called the book of Numbers in the Greek system in the Septuagint because the first chapter is all a bunch of numbers, which is perfectly fine. But I just want to make sure you understand this is the book that tells us about the wilderness wandering. Now, why do we have numbers, a bunch of numbers in the first chapter? Well, as you begin to read, it says this: the Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai, so they're still at Mount Sinai, in the tent of meeting on the first day of the second month. So first day of the second month. So get your chronology here. Jump back to the end of Exodus for a second. Exodus chapter 40. You can see the author here is very interested in time and sequences, but most people are unfamiliar with those references, and so just kind of they gloss over them. But look at chapter 40 of Exodus. Chapter 40 of Exodus, verse 16. Thus did Moses, according to all the Lord had commanded him. So he did. And in the first month, in the second year, on the first day of the month, the tabernacle was erected. So there's that story we read last time about the glory cloud and all that. They finished the tabernacle. It's the first month, first day of the first month of the second year. Okay, it's New Year's, second year around. They're Mount Sinai still. A whole year later. Took a while to do all this stuff that we'd heard in Exodus. Now look at Numbers. The Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the tent of meeting on the first day of the second month of the second year. So this is 1 year later, 1 month later, 30 days later. After they come out of the land of Egypt, saying, take a census of all the congregation of the people of Israel by families, by fathers' houses, according to the number of names, every male, head by head, from 20 years, highlight that, 20 years old and upward. 20 years old and upward, highlight that. All in Israel who are able to go forth to war. They're about to head for Mount Sinai. They're about to leave Mount Sinai. They have the law. They have the ark. They have everything they need. It's time to head to the promised land. Now, the promised land from Mount Sinai to the southern tip of the Negev is only about a 3 days journey. Now, they got women and children and cattle and things like that and elderly, so you might give them another couple of days. But they don't need more than a week, okay? Maximum would be a week that they would need. So they're going to count and see how many men they have who can swing the sword, right? A 20-year-old man and upward. So they count them all. So this is where we get all those numbers. Look at verse 44. Chapter 1, verse 44. These are those who were numbered, whom Moses and Aaron numbered. You can see why it's called the Book of Numbers. With the help of the leaders of Israel, 12 men, each representing his father's house. So the whole number of the people of Israel by their father's houses, from 20 years old and upward, every man who was able to go forth to war in Israel, their whole number was 603,550. There's your specific number. They really were careful counting. You remember when they came out of Egypt in Exodus chapter 12, they said there were 600,000 men plus women and children. So this is the men, the 20-year-old and upward, the men. And here you get a little more specific number. That was a general number in Exodus 20. In Exodus chapter 12. So here in Numbers chapter 1, verse 47, but the Levites were not numbered by their ancestral tribe. Why? Because they were not going to go out to war. The Levites had chosen to be with the Lord. Remember at Mount Sinai with the golden calf incident. And so they had a very special job. They had swords as well, but their swords were not for killing Gentiles who might attack. Their swords were for killing Israelites who might attack. Their job was to surround and protect the tabernacle and to take care of its furnishings. They were to encamp around it, verse 50. Verse 51, and if anyone else comes near, he shall be put to death, it says, verse 51. All right, so that's the purpose of the Levites. So they're those who are able to carry the sword. They're not going to go out to war, so they're not numbered. In chapter 2, we hear about the actual encampment. When they encamped so that the tent of meeting was always set up facing the west. Okay, so the entrance gate was on the east. So when you went into the tabernacle, you headed in a westerly direction. When you went out of the tabernacle, you headed in an easterly direction. You might say, well, wait a minute, I thought our churches are oriented, aren't they? So they face east. But that's right, but we're not Judaizers. If we were Judaizers, we'd be avoiding bacon and all sorts of other funny things. But we're not Judaizers, okay? Jesus declared all foods clean, okay? Have bacon, but just be careful and make sure you talk to your cardiologist. So the laws of the Old Testament were all intended to direct us to one great law. Love God. And as Jesus says, there is a second, your neighbor is yourself, because he's in the image and likeness of God. And in that, all the law and the prophets is fulfilled. The law about bacon, okay, the law about, your yarmulke and the Sabbath and all washing, all those things, all were intended to direct you to monotheism. If you're a monotheist and you remain monotheist, then all those other laws don't mean anything. This is why Jesus said this. It's not what goes into the mouth that makes a man unclean, it's what comes out of his mouth. Right? Is he going to profess Yahweh? Is he going to profess the law of the one true God? Or is he going to be a polytheist or a pagan? Okay, so chapter 2, we hear about the encampment. This is in chapter 2, how they encamped. You also hear about it in chapter 3, chapter 2 and 3, about the encampment, how it was set up. The tabernacle was set up so that the entrance was on the east side. The temple ends up being built the same way, so the entrance is on the east side. But why are our churches built the opposite way? Well, not to be opposite, but our churches are built facing east because our churches are built in order to house a liturgy which is apostolic. And the apostolic liturgy, which comes from Jerusalem, handed down to us for 2,000 years, began in a place where they prayed facing the Mount of Olives, which is on the east, waiting for the Lord's return. This is why in the liturgy, this is what we talk about. We're praying for the Lord's return. This is what the liturgy is all about, right? Communion with Him. More on that in another lecture. All right. So as you read through the book of Numbers, a lot of other really interesting things for us, though we don't have time to look at all of them for our purpose in this study. I'd like you now to turn to chapter 10. Chapter 10, where you hear about them beginning to leave Mount Sinai. They're going to leave Mount Sinai. Chapter 10, verse 11. In the second year, in the second month, on the 20th day of the month. Sometimes you hear people say, oh, this is all made up stuff. Okay, when people make stuff up, they don't get that kind of detail. There's no way to do it. This author is very serious about giving you precise information that he has received, and he wants to hand it on to you. He's giving it down to the very day. And as you follow the chronology, you can see this is very critical information they passed on very carefully, very loyally throughout their generations. So it says here now on the 20th day, so 20th day, now this is after they took up their census, right? They left Sinai for the first time, and Judah led the charge, as you know why. And it says in chapter 10, verse 35, whenever the ark set out, Moses said, arise, O Lord, and let thy enemies be scattered, and let them that hate thee flee from before thy face. And when it rested, he said, return, O Lord, to the 10,000 thousands of Israel. Chapter 11. So this is the beginning. They just left Sinai, okay? All of these plans, all of this work, there was a bit of a hiccup there with the golden calf incident, but everything's taken care of now, and they're going to leave Mount Sinai, and they're heading to the promised land, about a 3 days journey. With women and children, again, you might give them a few extra days, so maybe a week, but it's a 3 days journey on foot. Chapter 10, verse 35, we hear that this is what Moses would do on their journey as they would go. This is what he was going to be doing. Chapter 11, and the people complained in the hearing of the Lord about the misfortunes, and when the Lord heard it, his anger was kindled, and the fire of the Lord burned against them and consumed some of the outlying parts of the camp. And the people cried to Moses, and Moses prayed for the Lord. So you'll hear this throughout their wanderings, of course. The people complain every time. Here they're complaining because they just want to complain. They're hungry, they're unhappy, and they complain. And Moses keeps interceding for them. Moses the merciful, as it says in the book of Sirach. Moses the merciful. All right. As they're complaining, what do they complain about? They want meat. They're hungry. They want more meat. Apparently the quail have stopped landing in the camp. All they have is manna. So in chapter 11, verse 10, it says, Moses heard the people weeping throughout their families, every man at the door of his tent, and the anger of the Lord was blazed hotly. And Moses was displeased. So everyone is unhappy. Okay, you ever been on a family trip like this? Okay, they just left suddenly. Right? They're hungry. They got to go to the bathroom. They're mad. And people are screaming and yelling. And Moses is unhappy too. And so it says, Moses said to the Lord, why hast thou dealt ill with thy servant? And why have I not found favor in thy sight? That thou dost lay the burden of all this people upon me. Did I conceive all this people? Did I give birth to them, that thou shouldst say to me, carry them in your bosom as a nurse carries a suckling child to the land which thou didst swear to give to their fathers? Where am I to get meat to give to all this people? For they weep before me, saying, give us meat that we may eat. I am not able to carry all this people alone. The burden is too heavy for me. If this is how you'll deal with me, then kill me, please. You would expect a big thumb to come out of the clouds and squish him, right? But no. God is merciful to him. Moses prays for the people in their mistakes. God is merciful with Moses. Moses is talking to God like a kid talks to his dad. Right? Again, you ever been on a family trip? This is how the kids talk, so Moses is talking to God as if he's his father. Why would he do such a thing? Because he knows something that we should know. Right? He knows something we should know. And so what does God do? Well, he understands, like a father understands his kid. And so he deals with he said, all right, don't worry, Moses, I'll take care of the people. Okay. And some of the trouble that you're dealing with, I'll take some of that pressure off you. Okay. But as far as these people who complained about the manna, verse 18, say to the people, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow you shall eat meat. You have wept in the hearing of the Lord. Who will give us meat to eat? For it was well with us in Egypt, you said. Therefore the Lord will give you meat, and you shall eat. You shall not eat 1 day or 2 days or 5 days or 10 days or 20 days, but a whole month until it comes out of your nostrils. So the people are going to get a little bit of a lesson here. All right. A lot more very interesting stories to read, but turn to chapter 13. There was a little venue of kind of the trouble Moses had to deal with throughout the 40 years in the wilderness. Chapter 13. The Lord said to Moses, send men to spy out the land of Canaan. So he sends 12 representatives, one for each tribe. And they go in. What's the purpose? God knows what the land's all about. Moses believes, but the people don't trust. And so they have to have one of their own to report to them what's there and why they're going to head off to this place. Right? They're at Mount Sinai. There's water. There's manna. They got food. And why head off to this other land? They don't know what they're going for. And they're going to have to go through a desert to get there. So in order to encourage them, there's going to be 12 representatives, 12 spies, to go into the land, check it out, and come back and report to the people. Caleb and Joshua, of course, are among them. And he tells them, be of good courage and bring back some fruit of the land. So they came back. It says in chapter 13, verse 21, they spied out the land. Verse 23, they came to the valley of Eshcol, and they cut down from there a branch with a single cluster of grapes. They carried it on a pole between two of them. Must have been a large, branch of fully loaded grapevines, And they carried it on a pole between the two of them, and they brought also some pomegranates and figs. That place was called the Valley of Eshcol because of the cluster which the men of Israel cut down from there. And at the end of 40 days, they returned to spy the land, and they came back. They said, we spied out the land. Verse 27, we came to the land which you sent us. It does flow with milk and honey. That is, it's a fertile land. And here is its fruit. So there's the first part of the report. Second part of the report, verse 28, yet the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified, very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. Now, the descendants of Anak was a man who must have been of large stature, and his sons, his descendants, are of large stature, and they're considered mighty warriors. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the Negev. The Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites dwell in the hill country, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the Jordan. But Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it. Then the men who had gone up with him said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. So they brought to the people of Israel an evil report of the land which they had spied out, saying, the land which we have gone to spy out, it is a land that devours its inhabitants. And all the people that we saw in it are men of great stature. And there we saw the Nephilim. No, the Nephilim were there? Well, the sons of Anak were there, and they were like Nephilim. I mean, come on. So what are the Nephilim? That's like saying the boogeyman was there. The Nephilim died during the flood. And we seem to ourselves to be like grasshoppers. And so we seemed to them. Then all the congregation raised a loud cry, and the people wept. They said, oh, would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would that we had died in the wilderness. Verse 3, why does the Lord bring us into this land to fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become a prey. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt? And they said, let us choose a captain and go back to Egypt. And Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before the assembly. And Joshua And Caleb quieted the people. They tried to tell him, no, it's a good land. Come on, let's go. Verse 13. Verse 10. But all the congregation said, stone them. Then the glory of the Lord appeared at the tent of meeting, and all the people of Israel. Verse 11. And the Lord said to Moses, how long will this people despise me? And how long will they not believe in me? In spite of all the signs which I have brought among them, I will strike them with the pestilence and disinherit them, and I will make you of you a nation greater and mightier than they. This is Moses' second offer. Remember at Mount Sinai with the golden calf? He had this offer. What does Moses do? Moses the merciful, as the book of Sirach says. He prays for the people. He intercedes for them. And God says, okay, fine, I'm not going to kill them now. All right, so verse 26. This is chapter 14, verse 26. The Lord said to Moses and to Aaron, how long shall this wicked congregation murmur against me? I have heard the murmurings of the people of Israel, which they murmur against me. Say to them, as I live, says the Lord, what you have said in my hearing I will do to you. Your dead bodies shall fall in this wilderness, and of all your number, look at this, numbered from 20 years old and upward, right? The soldiers who were supposed to be courageous, who have murmured against me, not one of them shall come to the land which I have sworn to make, except for Caleb and Joshua. I like those guys. Verse 32. But as for you, your dead bodies shall fall in this wilderness, and your children shall be shepherds in a wilderness 40 years, and shall suffer for your faithlessness. Now, what does that mean? Is God trying to punish the kids? No. It means that because the parents are going to be in the wilderness until they're dead, as for 40 years, the kids will end up suffering as well due to their parents' unfaithfulness. Your children shall be shepherds, your children shall suffer in this wilderness for 40 years until the last of your dead bodies lies in this wilderness. According to the number of days in which you spied out the land, 40 days, every day a year, you shall bear your iniquity 40 years, and you shall know my displeasure. I, the Lord, have spoken. Surely this I will do to you, to all this congregation that are gathered together against me in this wilderness, and they shall come to a full end, and they shall die. And then, of course, the spies who had reported evilly, they all died that moment. So for 40 years, they're going to wander in the wilderness. A lot of people don't know this. They don't understand, why did the people wander for 40 years? No GPS, or they're just, what were they doing? They get lost in the wilderness. It's a long journey. It's 3 days from Sinai to the Negev. And if you go up around the Dead Sea, which they're eventually going to do, it's a week. It's not that long. A little over a week. So what are they doing? Is you look on a map and you watch their journey from here on out. They're basically just going in circles. Here's the Dead Sea. Okay, and then here's the Sinai Peninsula. Here's Mount Sinai. And what they do is they leave Sinai and they just basically go in circles. Here's the Mediterranean there. So they just go in circles for 40 years. Killing time, or killing Israelites, depending on how you want to look at it. So and then 40 years later, at the end of 40 years, when the last guy's dead, now it's time to go in. So now they make a journey up around the Dead Sea and come in across the top of the Dead Sea. Okay? That's the 40-year wander in the wilderness. And that's the rest of the book of Numbers. We don't need to read all the other stories for now. Now it's good enough for what we're doing here. Okay, so then they eventually come to, after 40 years, they come up around the Dead Sea and cross over on the top, okay? But just before they cross over the Jordan that dumps into the Dead Sea, just before they cross over into the Promised Land, they get one more book called the Book of Deuteronomy. This is one big, long speech of Moses. It's the last time he gets to talk to them. He's not going into the Promised Land because of some incidences that occur in the Book of Numbers. So he's not going to be able to go in. And so instead, Joshua is going to lead the people in. Moses is probably more than happy to be done with the people anyway after all this. But so Moses is not going to go in. Joshua is going to lead them in across the Jordan into the Promised Land. Before he lets them go, he gives them this big, long speech called the Book of Deuteronomy. Look what it says here. We'll just read the beginning. These are the words that Moses spoke to all Israel beyond the Jordan, the wilderness, in the Arava, over against Suf, between Paran, Tophel, Lavan, and other places. It is 11 days' journey from Horeb, from Sinai, by way of Mount Seir to Kadesh Barnea. 11 days' journey from Mount Sinai up around, from here up around the Dead Sea. It's not a big piece of real estate. Okay? If you look at the Promised Land, look at Israel on a big map. It's a very small piece of geography. It is 11 days' journey from Horeb by this direction, 3 days' journey the other way. But so there were two options. Originally, they were going to go in this way. They were going to come from Mount Sinai right into the Promised Land. Well, to the bottom of the Negev, that's a 3 days' journey. But they didn't. They ended up wandering for 40 years, and then they came in this way. Why does God bring them in this way? He wants them to conquer Jericho first. Jericho is the biggest, most heavily armored, thickest walled city that they will encounter in all of the Promised Land. So they're going to attack the most difficult city first. This is to show them, of course, that they need to be faithful from here on out. This is to show them that God is with them. All right, that's the book of Deuteronomy. You can, again, if you like, you can read that on your own. We don't have time to read all of these beautiful stories in our study today. So at the end of the book of Deuteronomy, Moses dies. This is recorded in chapter 34. And Joshua takes over. The book of Joshua tells us about their entrance into the Promised Land. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses, minister, Moses, my servant, is dead. Now, therefore, arise, go over this Jordan, you and all the people, into the land which I am giving them. Now, there's two things that Joshua is told they have to do. They have to be courageous, and they have to be righteous. They have to keep the law. Now, what is the law? As you read through, it's don't worship the foreign gods. When you go into the land, worship only Yahweh. Don't worship the gods you encounter in these pagan peoples. So you have to be righteous, keep the law of God, and you have to be courageous. You have to have both elements. In chapter 2, we have a little story about the salvation of Rahab the harlot. And it's not critical for the bigger picture, but I did want to stop and say a few words about it. As you hear about the conquering of the land, you can get some sort of an idea that there's ethnic cleansing going on here. They're going in and wiping out all non-Israelites. No, that's what the modern Israelis did when they created the recent, the new state of Israel. Yeah, that's ethnic cleansing. They're still doing it right now. But that's not what was going on here. Rahab has heard, along with all the people in Jericho, these people have been wandering for 40 years, not very far away from Jericho. 40 years. All of the trade routes go from Egypt all up through Jericho and up the Jordan Valley. Okay, so everybody in Jericho has heard what happened to Egypt and the Egyptians in the Red Sea. Everyone's heard what the Israelites have been doing out in the wilderness, how anyone that attacks them, they're wiped out. So the people in Jericho had lots of opportunities, along with everybody else in the land, to hear about and know about who these people are and about their God. That anyone who stands before them to attack and try to stop them is mowed over. So what does that mean? This is very important for a polytheist. A polytheist believes there are many gods. But a polytheist does not worship all the gods in the universe. A polytheist worships only the gods that he believes he needs to be concerned about, the ones he should fear, the ones that can either hurt him or help him. And so the first stage of revelation of the God of Abraham, of monotheism, to the pagan world is that the God of Abraham is more powerful than all other gods. We talked about this in our study of the book of Exodus. So over 40 years from the conquering of the Egyptians all the way until the present time, the people in the promised land have heard over and over about the power of this God. They have enough information to know that if he is more powerful than all other gods, then he is the one to be feared. He is the one to be worshipped. And Rahab the harlot and her family conclude this, while everybody else in Jericho has the same information. Right? So they all have the same information, but only a few people in Jericho act in faith upon what they've heard. And so Rahab, of course, is saved. This is, remember, I had you mark Exodus chapter 9, verse 16. God said to Pharaoh, the reason why I've let you live, Pharaoh, through all this is because of my mercy. I could have wiped you out at the beginning, but rather I've let you live so that my name may be proclaimed throughout all the land and all the nations, right? And so look what's happened. Rahab has heard what Yahweh has done to the Egyptians. She has heard what God has done to the Amalekites and to the other nations that tried to stop Israel as they passed through the land. And she's concluded that this is the God to be worshipped. And so she asked for these two spies who come to the land, please save me and my family. And so they do. In chapter 3, we hear about them crossing over the Jordan. Okay, so here's your Dead Sea. Here's the top of the Dead Sea and the Jordan River. You have here and here a big open plain. This is the valley, right? The flat valley area. And on one side you have a mountain range and a mountain, and on the other side of the mountain range. This is the mountains of Moab. And on the other side you have the mountains of Judea. Jericho sits at the foot of the Judean mountains just before you start to go up the hill. It's in the plain. The people in camp opposite Jericho, this is where Moses delivers to them the law in the book of Deuteronomy. Now Joshua is going to lead them across the Jordan to attack Jericho. Okay? Chapter 3, we hear about them crossing the Jordan and how the waters part, just like at the Red Sea for Moses, so also for Joshua. More on that in another study. In chapter 6, they come and they attack Jericho. And in chapter 6, they're given the directions specifically of how they're going to do this. It says, verse 3, you shall march around the city, all the men of war, going around the city once. Thus shall you do for 6 days. 7 priests shall bear 7 trumpets, and in the ark, and on the seventh day you shall march around 7 times. And on the 7th time you shall cry out, and the walls will be flattened. What? What kind of battle plan is that? Well, it's one that's going to take some faith. Can you imagine being a man of war? And this is, okay, Joshua, how are we going to do it? Our swords are sharpened, we're ready to go. Okay, guys, here's what we're going to do. Did you all have your coffee? Yeah, okay. We're going to head to the city. Yeah, all right. Then and then we attack. No. We're just going to, you keep your swords sheathed. We're going to go around the city once. And the priests are going to go in front of us with the ark. The priests? What are they going to do? They're going to carry the ark. What are they going to do? Well, how are they going to carry a box? How are they going to fight? No, they're not going to fight. They're just going to carry the ark. Okay, so and then we attack. No. Then we come back to camp. Well, then what do? Well, then we eat lunch. Then you take a nap, a little dinner, go to bed. Okay, so then we attack the next day then. No, we'll do the same thing. Are you crazy, Joshua? On the 7th day, we'll go around 7 times. And on the 7th time, we'll shout out with our voices and blast the trumpets, and the walls will come crumbling down. And then you attack the city. Where did you get this battle plan, Joshua? From God, right? This is not the way you attack a city from a human mindset, right? This is intended to be the exact opposite thing. And notice the 7. Why 7? 7, Sheva, right? And Shava, we talked about 7 in covenant, right? That image. So they're going to conquer as God promised, because if they are with him in covenant, he is with them. And if they are with him and he is with them, then no one can stand before them. Very important for them to understand as they come into the promised land. And so they do. And you hear about the rest of the stories in the book of Joshua, for better or for worse. As you read through the story, you're going to hear about them conquering the land. Nations will either decide to submit and join them, and other nations will say, no, we're going to fight against this God and against this people. Our gods are stronger than that God. And of course, they're conquered. And then we come to the end of the book of Joshua. The end of the book of Joshua, chapter 23. A long time afterward, when the Lord had given rest to Israel from all their enemies round about, Joshua was old and well advanced in years, and Joshua summoned all Israel, their elders and heads. And he said, I am old and well advanced in years, and you have seen all the Lord has done for you. Verse 6. Therefore, be very steadfast to keep and to do all that is written in the book of the law, turning aside from it neither to the left nor to the right. What does that mean? He's talking about bacon, you think? Talking about whether you can mow the lawn on the Sabbath? That you may not be mixed with these nations left here among you, for I do not like mixed genetics. Oh, that's not what it says. Or make mention of the names of their gods. Right? The whole point of bringing Israel out of Egypt was to get them out of polytheism. Now he's going to send them back into a land that is all polytheistic. Okay? So they go back into a polytheist land and they become polytheists again. Then the whole thing is, you might as well just left them in Egypt. For the Lord has driven out before you great and strong nations. And as for you, no man has been able to withstand you. One man puts to flight 1,000, since it is the Lord your God who fights for you. And he promised you, take heed yourselves, therefore, to love Yahweh your God. That's a statement of monotheism there. That doesn't mean be pious or be really, really devoted. It means you worship only one God, Yahweh your God. Take heed to worship him. For if you turn back and join the remnant of these nations that are left here among you, and make marriages with them. Why is he concerned about marriages? Well, the same reason why you wouldn't want one of your kids to marry a pagan kid. All right, look at this. So that you marry their women and they yours? Know assuredly that the Lord your God will not continue to drive out these nations before you, but they shall become a snare and a trap for you, a scourge on your sides, thorns in your eyes, till you perish from all this good land which the Lord your God has given you. And now I am about to go the way of all the earth, and you know in your heart, in your souls, all of you, that not one thing is failed of all the good things that the Lord your God has promised concerning you. All have come to pass. Not one of them has failed. Look at this, verse 15. But as all the good things which the Lord your God promised concerning you have been fulfilled for you, so the Lord will bring upon you all the evil things which were prophesied by Moses, until he has destroyed you from off this good land the Lord your God has given you. If you transgress the covenant of the Lord your God, which he commanded you, and go and eat bacon. No, go and serve other gods. Then the anger of the Lord will be kindled against you and you will die. Right? The whole purpose of all of this is monotheism, reestablishing monotheism. Okay? This is reestablishing Normandy, the beach at Normandy, okay? This is what Israel was intended to be, a place where monotheism could safely exist and then could spread to the nations. Chapter 24. Then Joshua gathered all the tribes of Israel to Shechem and summoned the elders, the heads, and the judges, and the officers of Israel, and they presented themselves before God. And Joshua said to all the people, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel." Now listen to this. Your fathers lived of old beyond the Euphrates. Terah, the son of Abraham and of Nahor, and they served other gods. You can see the theme here. Then I took your father Abraham from beyond the river Euphrates and led him through all the land of Canaan and made his offspring many. I gave him Isaac and Jacob, you know the story, and they eventually went down to Egypt, and then I brought them out of Egypt, and then I brought them after 40 years of wandering into this land, verse 11, and you went over the Jordan and came to Jericho. And the men of Jericho fought against you, and also the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, and I gave them into your hand, and I set the hornet before you, and drove them out from before you. It was not by your sword or by your bow. I gave you land on which you had not labored, cities which you had not built, and dwell there. You eat the fruit of vineyards and olive yards which you did not plant. Now look what God has given you. Right? Now, therefore, so look at this. You can see this. The call of Abraham from polytheism of Babylon was finally fulfilled in the calling of Israel from Egypt from polytheism into this land, right? The whole purpose is get away from polytheism. Verse 14. Now, therefore, based upon that information, based upon what God has done in salvation history, from Abraham, through Moses in the Exodus, through the Promised Land, through Joshua. Now, therefore, fear Yahweh, verse 14, and serve him. This is a statement of monotheism versus polytheism. Put away the gods which your fathers served beyond the river Euphrates and in Egypt, and serve Yahweh. And if you will be unwilling to serve Yahweh, choose this day whom you will serve, whether it be the gods your fathers served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my household, we will serve Yahweh. Verse 16. Then the people answered, far be it from us that we should forsake Yahweh to serve other gods. For it is Yahweh our God, who brought our fathers out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage, who did these great signs in the sight, preserved for us in all the way that we went, and we, all the places we have passed. And the Lord drove out before us all these people who lived in the land. Therefore, look at that word therefore. Therefore, based upon that information, we will serve Yahweh, for he is our God. So why are they able to say right now we will serve Yahweh? Because they know what God's done for them in the past. They know salvation history. They know what God has done. And so therefore they know, woo, if he's done that, if he was able to, this God, Yahweh of Abraham, wow, if he could do that, then what could he do now and in the future for us? And so they are faithful to him. Their faith rests on reason, right? It's not just fideism. Believe. No, it's here's why you should believe, okay? Now, are you going to believe? Oh, yeah. Yeah, we're going to trust in him. We're going to have faith. Their faith, trust in Yahweh and being faithful to that one true God now and in the future depends upon their knowledge of the past, right? Their faith rests on reason. Let me give an example. If you see a guy fly fishing at a river, and you ever watch someone fly fish? It's a long, they keep going, and they keep going, right? They reel it in, they pull it out, and they fling it out, it goes back and forth, and they reel it in, right? Okay, and you watch a guy for an hour doing this, and then he reels it in, and he pulls the string out, and he reaches back. What do you think he's going to do? Do you think he's going to let go and let it fall behind his head? Do you think maybe he's going to bring it forward and snap it over his knee? Maybe he's going to bring it forward and just throw the rod out into the water. No, you've seen him do it 100 times. He's going to bring it forth again and throw it in reel, right? It's a pattern. And you can watch him, and I can say, I'll bet you $1,000 right now. Let's bet. What's he going to do? You'd be willing to probably bet $1,000 as you're watching him come forward, that he's going to cast the line in the water. Well, what gives you that kind of confidence? Well, because you've seen him do it before. Now, we're talking about a man changes. It's theoretically possible that that man could bring it forward and let go and let the rod fly out into the water. But highly unlikely, right? Man is predictable, but not immutable, right? Man does change. But we're talking about God, who is immutable. He does not change. And so you know, if you know what he's done in the past, you know with confidence, 100% guarantee what he's going to do right now and in the future. So that's faith resting on reason for your faith. John Paul II wrote an encyclical on this. If you haven't read it, I strongly recommend it. Okay, so look what they say. They say, because of what he has done, we will be faithful. So Joshua says, no, you don't understand. I'm not talking about adding him to your pantheon. He says, you cannot serve Yahweh, you people, for he is a holy God, that is, he's set apart. He's not like regular gods. Holy means different. He's a jealous God, which means he's not going to share the stage. Okay, Baal, Molech, Apis, they're perfectly happy sharing the stage with the other gods. As long as you feed them enough, they're happy. No God has ever said you can't worship other gods. They're perfectly fine in a happy pantheon. But this God is different. He will not allow you to worship other gods. So you can't say, I'm going to worship Yahweh. No. It means you have to worship him alone. He says, if you forsake Yahweh and serve foreign gods, then he will turn and do you harm after having done you good. And they said, no, trust us. We'll serve him alone. All right, so look at verse 31. And Israel served Yahweh all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua, who had, look at this, underline this, known all the work which the Lord did for Israel. Underline that word known, like maybe 3,000 times. So they served Yahweh all the days of Joshua, for the most part. And they continue to serve Yahweh even after Joshua died. Because the elders of Joshua's generation, who continued to live beyond him, also had known what God had done for them in the past. And so they continued to be faithful to him. All right, now we come to the book of Judges. We're not going to read the whole thing here, but I just want to read into the first couple chapters to conclude our study thing. The book of Judges tells about how things went after Joshua died. That was a little summary statement at the end of Joshua. The book of Judges gives you actually storylines, Gideon and Samson, these judges, these rulers that after Moses, after Joshua, God raised up then other individuals who were, some of them a little more pious than others, some a little more military might than others, but they were the judges, these leaders of the people. Okay? And as you read the story, you hear the problem as you read chapter 1 of Judges, that chapters 1 and 2. The problem is the people have begun to fall into polytheism. How did this happen? Look what it says. This is chapter 2, verse 6. You get a repetition here. Chapter 2, verse 6. When Joshua had dismissed the people of Israel went each to his inheritance to take possession of the land, and the people served, this is Joshua chapter 2, verse 7, served Yahweh all the days of Joshua and the days of the elders who outlived Joshua, who had seen all the great work which the Lord had done for Israel. You see that? And Joshua died, verse 10, and all that generation also, eventually, were gathered to their fathers. And there arose another generation after them. Look at this, who did not know Yahweh or the work which he had done for Israel. Okay, so you have a problem now. The people were faithful to Yahweh based upon what they knew he had done in the past. But now you have a generation that does not know what Yahweh has done. They didn't know. And so they don't serve him. Right? How can you ask someone to have faith without reason? Right? Imagine I walked up to you and said, I have a God that I think you should worship. What? Oh yeah, he's the most powerful God. He's more powerful than any God that you've ever heard of. Really? Actually, I don't even tell you that power. I just tell you about him. I just tell you, I have a God. I'm going to tell you need to worship him. You say, why should I worship him? Right? You want reason. You should trust this God. Why should I trust him? You should be faithful to this God alone. Why? Right? You want reason. Here's the problem. These people have no reason to be faithful to Yahweh because they don't know what he's done. What happened? Obviously, there was a breakdown of catechesis. Remember Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. And you shall teach this to your children. When you sit down, when you stand up, when you walk by the way, wherever in the house, out of the house, teach your kids what Yahweh has done for you in the past, so that they may be faithful to him now and in the future. Okay? All right, so now look what's happened. We have a generation that has arisen that has not received the information they need to be faithful. They have not received the reason to be faithful to Yahweh. So what do you think they're going to do? Well, remember, God has created man for relationship. We talked about this. Man is by nature a religious being. He is by nature, we desire relationship. Man does not like to be alone. He likes to be in company with others. That's relationship, religion, right? And so man is by nature a relationship, a religious being. And so what if you do not tell a man what he is to worship? Well, he will worship, okay? You might say, what about the kids today? They have no religion. Oh, they have religion. You walk into a teenager's room, show me the posters on the wall, and I'll show you their God, right? Look at the posters on the wall. Look at how they're dressed. Look at how they're talking. They are imitating. They are yearning for relationship with something that they see as more powerful than they are. And so here's what happens in the story. Look what it says here in chapter 2, verse 11. And the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and they served the Baalim. They forsook the Lord, the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of Egypt. They went off and served the other gods. Is this not the problem we have today? We have an entire generation of Christians who have walked away from the church. And the clergy wring their hands, right? Oh, where are the people? The parents wring their hands as they see their kids grow up. They go off to college. They come back. They're Buddhists. They know who knows what. What's happened? Well, we haven't passed on the faith. The present generation of Christians has not received the faith from the previous generation. How'd that happen? Well, there were a few things that may have gotten in the way. I don't know. I'm not a historian. What was in the center of their living room as those kids grew up? Was it a Bible or a TV? What was the conversation at the dinner table? About Moses and Aaron? Or about Seinfeld or whatever they were watching at the time? Right? What was catechizing these kids? Kids are catechized. You can't avoid it. They're sponges. You know that. If you're a parent, you have kids, they'll just absorb. They're a sponge. So in whatever you put a sponge in, it absorbs it. What did we put our children in? What has this generation been immersed in? Has it been immersed in the culture of the world or the culture of Jesus Christ? Immersed in the words of this world or the words of Jesus Christ? And so the problem is the modern generation of Christianity today, and obviously there are faithful Christians out there today, thank God, but there is a problem. There is a massive problem. The vocation crisis. Have you ever heard people talk about the vocation crisis? Oh, the vocation crisis. And we wring our hands. Oh, we need more clergy. We don't need more clergy. Our churches are empty. What we need more is Christians. We need more Christians, right? Vocations come from Christian families. Christians come from Christian families. And so, yeah, there's a shortage of priests and clergy. The Protestants have the problem. Lutherans, Presbyterians, they're all massive clergy crisis. What's going on? There is an entire generation of Christians across the board that have not passed on the faith to the next generation. They allowed their children to be catechized by the public school system, by the TV, by Mr. Rogers, Snoop Doggy Dogg, CNN, MTV, whatever the case may be. And now those children are adults. And you can't drag them to church anymore. They're living on their own, making their own decisions. And they're religious. They're as religious as you would ever want them to be. You can't change that. That's the hardware, right? You can't change the hardware. But the software has changed, right? They are worshiping materialism. They're worshiping Buddha. They're worshiping who knows what. They're worshiping even Muhammad. I mean, it's ridiculous the crazy things that are happening. Christians converting to other religions, Christians that are agnostics, Christians that are atheists. The faith has not been passed on to them. And they have continued to be religious, but they are worshiping the wrong God. Now, how do we solve that problem? Well, we should just throw up our hands and say, well, it's too late then, just forget it. No, that's not the case. Look at Egypt. The people of Israel were in Egypt. To a man, they were worshiping the pagan gods, right? How do we do it? Catechesis, right? Bob keeps holding up that catechism. Exactly, catechesis. And I'm not talking about catechesis at Sunday school, little kids. You can catechize little kids all you want. If they go home and it is not reinforced in the home, if what they're learning in Sunday school for an hour or 10 minutes is not the world in which they exist at home, then it's just a waste of time, waste of classroom space, waste of all that energy. CCD programs, right? Again, the same thing. It's just a waste of time. What we need to be doing is catechizing the adults, catechizing the parents that didn't get the catechesis they should have gotten when they were kids. Right? How do we do this? You're talking about something, this is catastrophic. It's massive. It's beyond, how could we fix it? Well, I can't do it, but we can do it. I can't do it, but we can do it. Because God is with us. Who am I that I should bring Israel out of Egypt? Moses says. And God says, but I will be with you, Moses. If God could bring through one man, Moses, his people out of Egypt, out of paganism, out of worshiping pagan gods, and bring them into the promised land, and all the stories we've heard, then we can surely, by the hand of God, bring the present generation out of Egypt again. How do you do it? Start a Bible study. Start go start teaching adult education in your parish. Sunday school, very important, very nice, but adult education, it's the adults that need it. Bible studies, catechism classes for the adults, and not just the converts. And you know what happens when parishes offer those types of courses? They're jam-packed. Because the adults want to learn, right? The adults are just as religious as the kids. We are religious by nature. They're yearning for the information they were never given. And so what we need to do is stop wringing our hands about vocation crises and all these other things. What we need to do is start educating the adults we have at church on a Sunday. And then they will educate the adults they know, who will educate the adults they know. And before you know it, we will be back out of Egypt. Glory be to Jesus Christ, as the eternal Father, as all holy, good, and life-giving Spirit, both now and ever and into ages of ages. Amen.